All right, so you're here, which means you're probably the kind of person who likes to cut to the chase, right? You want that good stuff, the really fascinating bits of information without all the fluff.
Exactly.
So that's what we're all about, and today we're diving into something really intriguing.
Yeah.
It all starts with a declassified CIA document that recently resurfaced, and it's connected to this project called Sunstreak.
Okay.
Have you heard about that?
Yeah, vaguely. I know it involves some pretty far-out research.
Yeah, so Sunstreak, think of it as the CIA dabbling in some unconventional intelligence gathering back in the 70s and 80s.
Okay.
They were exploring whether individuals with, alleged paranormal abilities could actually provide useful intel.
Right, like remote viewing?
Exactly. These so-called remote viewers, they were tasked with providing insights into things that traditional methods couldn't reach.
It was a pretty controversial program, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah, definitely debated, but also fascinating. And this document we're looking at, it's dated December 5th, 1988. And it centers on one of these remote viewing sessions. A viewer was given a specific set of coordinates.
Interesting.
781-410-110121. Kind of a mouthful, right?
Yeah, just a string of numbers.
But here's the catch for the viewer. These were just numbers. They had no idea what they represented.
Yeah, I see.
But the CIA internally, for training purposes, had linked these coordinates to a very specific target, the Ark of the Covenant.
Wow.
So that's what makes this deep dive so compelling.
I can see why you're excited about this one.
We're going to explore what this document reveals through the eyes of that remote viewer.
Right.
And see how it aligns with the historical and biblical accounts we have of the Ark.
Pulling from the declassified document itself and a recent news article that really brought this whole thing back into the spotlight.
Exactly. We've got our work cut out for us.
So let's get to it.
Okay, so right off the bat, the document lays out the date, December 5th, 1988, and it even gives us a viewer identifier.
Oh.
Number 032.
Makes you wonder how many others were involved in this project.
Right. The task itself seems pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Access and describe whatever's at those coordinates.
Simple enough, but the implications are huge.
Exactly, and that's what's so interesting about the viewer's description, because they had no prior knowledge of what the target was supposed to be.
Right.
But their initial impressions, they talk about a container that holds another container inside.
A container within a container? Interesting.
Then they start describing the materials, fashioned of wood, gold, and silver.
Okay, familiar materials?
And the shape, noting that it resembles a coffin. But here's where it gets really interesting. They mention it's decorated with seraphim.
Seraphim.
You know those winged celestial beings?
Yeah.
If you think about the biblical descriptions of the Ark, and even the sketch on page 16 of the document, which the news article points out it's a winged creature.
Right.
That's a pretty significant detail.
It is. What do you think struck you most about that initial description?
I think for me, it's that convergence of the materials and the imagery.
I see.
Wood, gold, silver. They're consistently associated with the Ark in historical texts.
Yeah, definitely.
And then the seraphim specifically mentioned as being part of its design. The fact that a remote viewer with no apparent prior knowledge would pick up on those specific elements.
That's pretty compelling.
It is, isn't it? It makes you wonder.
Yeah, it does.
So then the viewer moves on to describe the location,
Okay.
placing it somewhere in the Middle East. They even pick up on details like individuals speaking Arabic, visual elements suggestive of mosque domes. They even sketch that on page 12.
Interesting.
They describe the people as wearing virtually all white with black hair and dark eyes, and one had a mustache.
So they're getting pretty specific here.
Right. It paints a surprisingly vivid picture.
It does. It really does. And what's fascinating is how these seemingly small details could actually point towards a very specific location in the Middle East.
Right. The clothing descriptions, the mention of Arabic.
It adds another layer of specificity to the whole thing.
Definitely. And then there's the environment itself.
Okay.
It's described as hidden underground, dark and wet.
Not exactly a museum display, is it?
No, not at all. But then the viewer starts talking about the purpose of this object. And this is where it goes beyond just a physical description.
Right.
They say its purpose is to bring a people together. It's connected to ceremony, memory, homage, the resurrection.
Wow, that suggests a pretty profound significance.
Doesn't it? It's not just an ornate box.
No, not at all. These insights suggest a much deeper meaning of potential impact.
Right, and then they go on to say that it contains spirituality, information lessons, and historical knowledge far beyond what we now know.
That's a big statement.
It speaks to the Ark's legendary power and the deep reverence it has inspired for centuries.
What do you think that historical knowledge could entail? Could it be Scrolls, artifacts, something else entirely?
It's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It really fires up the imagination.
It does.
And of course, a sacred artifact like this, it wouldn't be without protection, right?
You would think not.
The viewer describes it as protected by entities.
And there's that sketch on page 14 that seems to depict these guardians.
I remember seeing that.
They emphasize that it can only be opened now by those who are authorized to do so.
Okay.
And only when the time is deemed correct. It's almost like there's a specific moment in history for its unveiling.
Fascinating. What are your thoughts on the idea of these entities? Could that be interpreted in different ways?
Definitely. I mean, depending on your perspective, entities could refer to anything from divine guardians in a religious context.
Right.
To maybe even physical security measures put in place long ago that the remote viewer is perceiving in a non-traditional way.
I see. Yeah, it raises some interesting questions about how we interpret these kinds of descriptions.
It really does. And what's particularly striking is the warning about unauthorized attempts to open it.
Oh, right.
The viewer states that individuals opening the container by prying or striking are destroyed by the container's protectors through the use of a power unknown to us.
That's a pretty serious warning. It is. And the document on page 17 echoes this warning. It sounds pretty intense.
It suggests a pretty formidable defense mechanism, whatever its nature might be.
Right. And that phrase, power unknown to us.
Chilling.
Yeah. So let's shift gears a bit and look at the news article that reported on this document resurfacing.
Okay.
It largely confirms the details we've just discussed from the CIA's records.
Right.
And really highlights how the remote viewer's description seems to align with the biblical accounts of the Ark.
Interesting.
It also gives us that important historical context, reminding us that the Ark was built by the Israelites after their exodus from Egypt around the 13th century BC.
Right.
And that it housed the Ten Commandments in the most sacred space of the Temple of Jerusalem.
Yep. Yeah. The Holy of Holies.
Exactly. And the article emphasizes that enduring mystery surrounding the Ark's disappearance.
Of course.
After the Babylonian sack of Jerusalem in 586 BC.
Right. It just vanished.
And it touches on that well-known legend of it being taken to Ethiopia.
Yeah.
And potentially residing in a church there today.
That's a popular theory.
It is. And it's important to remember that there are already these established beliefs and theories about where the Ark might be.
Yeah. So this CIA document and the remote viewer's insights, they add another layer to that existing mystery.
Exactly, they do. And the news article picks up on some of those more vivid details from the remote viewer's observations.
Okay.
The coffin shape, the Middle East location, the Arabic speakers, the underground setting.
It's all there.
Yeah, all those points of convergence with the CIA record are highlighted. The article even mentions that the podcast host who originally featured this document described the remote viewer's report as bone-chilling.
Wow, that definitely adds to the intrigue.
It does, doesn't it? It speaks to the power of these kinds of claims.
It really does. What I find particularly interesting in the article's account is the specific mention of the viewer's sketches.
Oh, yeah.
Beyond the seraphim, they apparently drew a white mosque with a dome, and even 8 figures that they labeled as mummies. Yeah, these visual details, however they were perceived, remotely offer another facet to consider.
What do you make of the mummies in particular?
It's hard to say. It could suggest any number of things.
Right.
From actual preserved bodies in the vicinity to maybe a symbolic representation of the past or those who are connected to the Ark.
It's another layer of enigma, isn't it?
Definitely. And the article also notes a list of what it calls ominous words that were apparently recorded by the viewer.
Oh.
Death, forbidden, protected, scared, destroyed, pain, and anguish.
Those are some heavy words.
They are. It paints a picture of something sacred and potentially very dangerous.
Yeah, it's like the remote viewer was tapping into a sense of the power and the potential consequences associated with this artifact.
Right. The repetition of words like destroyed and pain definitely underscores those warnings mentioned in the documentation.
Absolutely. So now there are some additional details that come from this pasted text.
Pasted text.
Yeah, it seems like these might be notes from a different source, perhaps the viewer's own more informal reflections.
Okay. This text mentions the Ark containing a metallic cold steel wheel.
That's a detail we haven't heard before.
Right. It's not present in the CIA's summary.
So the viewer's adding something new here.
It makes you wonder if they were picking up on something else entirely.
Yeah.
Or if this is a more nuanced or perhaps even metaphorical description.
I wonder.
And this pasted text also gives us a sense of its current state, noting that it smells wooden decayed.
That's interesting.
It adds a really tangible, almost sensory dimension to this whole remote perception.
It does, but it's when we get to the potential consequences of opening the Ark according to this text that things get really intense.
Yeah, it's a wild mix of potential outcomes.
What do they say?
We see power light swords, sealed quick death,
Wow.
but then also this barrage of negative experiences.
Like what?
Terror, horror, anguish, pain, destroyed heat light, searing, burning, scarred. It's a lot to process.
It is. It's a pretty stark contrast to the CIA documents' mention of a relatively simple lock mechanism. Right. It really highlights that duality, often associated with powerful and sacred objects in mythology and folklore.
Yeah, that idea of immense benefit intertwined with the risk of catastrophic consequences.
The sheer intensity of those negative descriptors, terror, horror, anguish, it's pretty striking.
It really is.
But even within this more ominous text, we see echoes of those earlier themes.
Oh, okay.
There's mention of potential positive aspects, wealth, information, knowledge, historical, spiritual lessons.
So even in the face of these dangers,
Yeah, there's still that suggestion of profound knowledge and understanding to be gained.
it reinforces that central idea that the Ark, whatever its physical form and location, is perceived as holding something incredibly significant,
Yeah.
both potentially beneficial and incredibly dangerous.
Exactly. So as we bring all of this together, what are the key takeaways for you from this deep dive into these documents?
For me, the most compelling thing is that consistent thread that runs through all these different sources. The CIA document, the news article, even the pasted text. Despite the varying contexts, there are these recurring details in the remote viewer's perceptions that align with historical and biblical descriptions of the Ark.
It's hard to ignore those parallels.
Yeah, we can't definitively say this constitutes proof of anything,
Right.
but those parallels are certainly intriguing and add another layer to a very old mystery.
Yeah, absolutely. Here you have this ancient artifact that has been lost to history for centuries with all sorts of theories about its fate.
Yeah.
And now this declassified CIA document introduces this really unconventional possibility,
Right.
an alleged remote viewing session that pinpointed a location and offered a description back in 1988.
It's pretty mind-blowing.
It makes you rethink the possibilities.
Yeah, and we can't ignore the recurring emphasis on protection and the potential dangers of unauthorized access.
Right.
Whether it's described as entities or results in terror and destruction.
It's not something to be taken lightly.
There's this consistent sense that the Ark is not to be trifled with. This raises a really interesting question about the nature of that protection.
It does, and it brings us back to that key insight from the CIA document, that it will be opened when the time is deemed correct, and the lock mechanism will be simple. It's almost as if there's a predestined moment for its revelation,
Right.
contrasting sharply with the dire consequences described for forcing it open.
So for you, the listeners taking this deep dive with us, consider this.
Okay.
Given the remote viewer's insights about the Ark containing historical knowledge far beyond what we now know, and its purpose to bring a people together, what might the implications be if it were to be discovered and opened in the future?
Wow.
How might it reshape our understanding of history, spirituality, and our shared human story?
That's a lot to think about.
It's definitely worth pondering the possibilities and perhaps revisiting some of those ancient accounts with this new, albeit unusual information in mind.
Definitely something to chew on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
My pleasure.
Until next time, keep seeking, keep questioning, and keep exploring those fascinating corners of our world. We'll be back soon with more intriguing deep dives.
Looking forward to it.
See you then!